Welcome to Leaf Status Report for January 10th, 2026. As always, I've simulated the rest of the NHL regular season 11,000 times today, with the Leafs' performances across all simulations forming this distribution. Now, yesterday there were only 3 games in the NHL, and of course we really only cared about one of them, which was the Washington Capitals versus Chicago Blackhawks. It's a minor misfortune that the Capitals did manage to beat the Blackhawks 5-1, but of course it's not the end of the world for us if we're hoping the Leafs would land in a projected playoff spot by sometime next week. What it does mean is that the Washington Capitals will be able to reclaim that M3 spot in our projections, in addition to moving themselves a notable margin away from the Leafs in today's table. The Leafs lose 0.05 expected points across our simulations today, going from 93.24 yesterday to 93.19 today. Like yesterday, the theoretical value of expected points I've calculated for today implies that collectively our simulations don't particularly over or underestimate the Leafs by any significant margin. And because the Leafs didn't play a game last night, we only have to worry about 2 controllable factors and randomness for our expected points change. Substituting all of yesterday's game data into today's simulations yielded a net loss of 0.02 expected points. In addition, we had 2 less overtime games per simulation than we did yesterday, which yielded an additional loss of 0.06 expected points. Overall, what this does end up meaning is that randomness today favored the Leafs by 0.03 expected points more than it did yesterday. Across all 11,000 seasons we simulated today, the minimum number of points the Leafs scored in a season was 72, and the maximum number of points they scored in a season was 114. That gives us an absolute range today of 42 points. Our inner 70% interval remains the same as it did yesterday, with our 15th percentile season still sitting at 87 points, and our 85th percentile season still sitting at 99 points. Our standard deviation drops ever so slightly over yesterday. Yesterday our standard deviation sat at 5.69 points, and today it drops by a single hundredth of a point down to 5.68 points. The Leafs lose 0.9% on our playoff odds today. Having made the playoffs in 46.4% of all simulations yesterday, today they've made the playoffs in 45.5% of all simulations. In addition to this, fairly unsurprisingly, their cup odds have also gone down ever so slightly. Today they managed to win the Stanley Cup in 1.38% of all simulations. And alongside this, their conditional cup odds have also gone down ever so slightly. In the 45.5% of situations where the Leafs do make the playoffs, they win the cup in 3.03% of those simulations. Taking a quick look at the Leafs' placing distribution across all simulations today, there's really only one notable change I can see at first glance, which is the fact that yesterday that wildcard 1, wildcard 2, wildcard 3 section there was sort of diminishing ever so slightly in probability from wildcard 1 down to wildcard 3. Today those 3 places specifically have flattened out a bit in our distribution. Unfortunately, they've flattened a bit negatively, with wildcard 1 going down a bit, I think wildcard 2 holding somewhat steady, and wildcard 3 coming up by a notable margin. Also taking a quick look at our EP spread across the entire league. The Leafs sit 16th overall in expected points at the moment, however there are still 14 teams within 1 standard deviation of them. For reference, the top end of that standard deviation window is the Vegas Golden Knights, and the bottom end of that standard deviation window is the Boston Bruins at the moment. Taking a look at the table, of course, because the Washington Capitals are the only Eastern Conference team that played last night, there's only one gap shift we have to talk about. Now yesterday, the Washington Capitals were sitting marginally in wildcard 1, a single hundredth of an expected point ahead of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And today, because they managed to beat the Blackhawks 5-1, they now have an over 1 expected point gap inside that top 3 Metropolitan Division block. Now, specifically as this pertains to the Leafs, what it's going to mean is that I don't think it's realistic to expect the Leafs to be able to chase down the Caps today, specifically because the Caps aren't playing a game. Although the Leafs are playing a game, I think really to close a gap more than 2 expected points, you need the Leafs to win and your other team you're trying to chase down to lose in some fashion. Now let's just briefly think about all the teams that are currently sitting around the Leafs in our expected points table. Generally, I've been saying that 2 expected points is a reasonable gap to expect to chase down if the Leafs can win a game and the other team in question can lose their game in some fashion. We have 0 teams below the Leafs within 2 expected points. And we have 3 teams above the Leafs within 2 expected points. Specifically, if the Leafs were able to chase down all teams within 2 expected points today, they'd be sitting in wildcard 1, which I think, given how their season has gone so far, is more than fine. Now, as well, 3 expected points is a gap that is possible to chase down. We've seen it happen in one day with a sufficiently good win and a sufficiently bad loss from our opposing team. There are almost 3 teams above the Leafs that fulfill that criteria. With the Detroit Red Wings a single 100th outside of that margin, so we're going to count them. And there's a single team below the Leafs within that margin, and that is the Florida Panthers, which we will get to when we talk about the key games. Unfortunately, we have 7 key games to worry about today. I'm just going to take this very careful and methodically, and we'll just start with the Leafs and go from there. At 7 p.m., the Toronto Maple Leafs host the Vancouver Canucks. All things considered, this is a fairly good matchup for the Leafs to have. They've got almost a 60% chance in my projections to win this game. However, that also comes at the high cost of having a very high expected points yield and therefore a very high potential to underperform if they lose even in overtime. That expected points yield, as we can see, sits at 1.32, which, especially like I've been saying the last couple weeks, really, means they have to win this game to keep in that hunt to chase down a projected playoff spot in the next week or so. As for the other 6 key games, luckily the first 3 immediately encompass all of the very, very important teams ahead of the Leafs. That is the Pittsburgh Penguins hosting the Calgary Flames at 3:30, the Buffalo Sabres hosting the Anaheim Ducks at 7, and the Philadelphia Flyers hosting the Tampa Bay Lightning also at 7. Now, if we were paying a good attention to the table, we'll remember these are the 3 teams that are less than 2 expected points ahead of the Leafs. So right now, I think basically the sequence of events we need for the Leafs to land in a playoff spot in tomorrow's projections is A, the Leafs win their game tonight against the Vancouver Canucks, and 2 of the Pittsburgh Penguins, Buffalo Sabres, and Philadelphia Flyers lose their games in regulation. The additional caveat for the Flyers is that they are the only one of those 3 teams that will overperform if they do take this game to overtime, no matter whether they win or lose there. So we especially want them to lose in regulation. But realistically, if any 2 of these 3 teams lose in regulation and the Leafs can win, that should put us in a playoff spot tomorrow in the projections. The next class of games are really the ones that we're just looking at the Leafs to not lose more of a gap on. That is the Wild hosting the Islanders at 8 and the Canadiens hosting the Red Wings at 7. Both the Islanders and Detroit have expected points yields of about 1.05 from the respective games. So basically, if the Leafs can win, we're fine with either of them losing in any fashion, as it would, in theory, put their gaps either about where they were with the Leafs already, or more likely close them even more, if only just a bit. Our final game at 7 p.m. between the Sens and Panthers is the most important if the Leafs end up losing tonight. Now, the Ottawa Senators sit a little less than 4 expected points behind the Leafs, and the Panthers sit 2.21 expected points behind the Leafs right now in our table, which does mean that our most preferable outcome is seeing the Ottawa Senators win in regulation by a narrow margin. Think something like a 3-2 Ottawa Senators win, where it doesn't go to overtime. For Canadian teams, luckily the only thing to really say is that the Winnipeg Jets do get a little bit of their playoff stock back by winning their game against the Kings yesterday. Also for cup odds, my simulations still have a Canadian team with a little over a 9% chance to win the cup at 9.34% of simulations today.